Okay, so is this on? Yes. So I will ask some questions and for maybe 10 minutes, and then Jason will read, and then we'll just open it up for your questions, which I'm sure you have. The first question I want to ask Jason is really, can you talk about, I know you can't talk about a lot of things, but what can you actually say about being in the CIA for more than 30 years that is not just a recitation of your titles and maybe cities where you might have visited, but something a little bit more deeper than that, the experience?
Thanks for coming tonight. I'm asked the question a lot. What does a CIA operations officer do overseas? Would answering that question satisfy your question? I sometimes use the analogy that we are sort of like clandestine journalists. A journalist will look for a story. We have intelligence requirements. A journalist will look for a source. We recruit foreigners to steal secrets for us. A journalist will file a story. We write intelligence reports. And a journalist will protect a source to the extent of even going to jail for refusing to name the source. And we use tradecraft to protect our sources. And tradecraft is a fancy name for skulking around. What we do is try to keep the relationship between an American intelligence officer and a foreign source, that relationship and that contact, we keep it clandestine. And so we sneak around a lot, and we sometimes don't meet people, but just pass notes or pick up dead drops and do things. So an operations officer in the CIA basically is a clandestine journalist.
And so how did you come to think of your role in respect to current events, history, politics? Did it connect? Did it sometimes not connect? How did you think about this? Here I am behind the soccer stadium, as you always say, doing this. What is the connectivity in your mind?
Well, now in retrospect, you sit back and you say, as we prepared to go out at midnight to meet the asset, we contemplated the vicissitudes of geopolitical struggle and the old Cold War and good versus evil. But the reality is, we just were going to go out and try to bring back intel and not get caught. And we knew what we needed to try to know, and if you could recruit a North Korean or you recruited a Russian, that would be great for your career. So basically, when you're in the station, you're sitting around the bullpen, you don't really think of these highfalutin ideas, but you just are out there like a plumber or a carpenter trying to do your craft.
And as the years went on, did you begin to ever think, I might write about this? I've been asked many times, how is it possible that Jason Matthews is writing books at such a high level so quickly in the life of a writer? And I don't really have an answer for that. You seem to have sprung from the head of Zeus, and so were you starting to read in this direction? Were you starting to write? What was the run up before you left the CIA?
Well, you actually answered the question. If I'm writing at a high level, it's because I'm smoking weed while I write. No, I'm kidding. People ask me that question as well, and in retrospect, when I try to formulate an answer, an operations officer does nothing but write during daylight hours. We write operational cables. We write cables, advocacy cables, hectoring headquarters back in Langley for bigger budgets or approvals for operations. We write intelligence assessments and intelligence estimates. And we also write what they call contact reports. When I go out and meet Ivan behind the soccer stadium, the next morning I owe headquarters a contact report, which is basically a little short story: who, what, when, why, where, atmospherics, whether he was nervous or not, how big the full moon was. So we're basically for 33 years I was writing. How I made the transition, starting to write after retirement, when the career came to a full and sudden stop, was as much therapy as anything else.
But I'm going to respectfully disagree with your own analysis, because what you were writing for the CIA were relatively short pieces of text, and what you've written here is a long, ornate, Byzantine story with all sorts of complexity, narrative complexity, not to mention vivid scenes of violence and sex, which I'm sure you're not sending to your CIA superiors. This came from other places too.
Well, I suppose. I mean, I've always read assiduously. I read a lot, and I enjoy novels and I enjoy fiction. And like I said, it was either start writing or go fishing or learn jazz hands dancing, and I don't fish.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about first Red Sparrow and then the new book, and then you can read a little bit from the new book.
Oh, goodness. Well, the premise in both books is that Dominika Egorova is a SVR, which is the old KGB, or the new KGB, intelligence officer. She is fed up with the rot and the corruption of Putin's Russia. She suffered personal indignities. They made her go to Sparrow School, which is, during the Soviet years, was a Russian sexual academy where they trained women to be seductresses. We use the word sexpionage, to sexually entrap recruitment prospects, to elicit information, and to blackmail them. An interesting note, when I was doing some research, in Russia, they called the women who were trained in these arts swallows, lastochka. But I found also references to sparrows, vorobi. So I took an author's artistic license to call Dominika and send her to Sparrow School, because I couldn't very well send her to the Russian Sex Academy and call it Swallow School.
Ba-dum-bum.
So Dominika is fed up with the rot of Russia, and she is then recruited by young CIA officer Nathaniel Nash, and they fall in love, and that affair is forbidden and mortally dangerous to her. And then she goes back to Moscow as CIA's penetration of the Kremlin and of the SVR. And who should notice her on her return to Moscow but old Blue Eyes himself, Vladimir Putin. And he brings her into his inner circle, and even into his bedroom. And all the while, Nate is outside waiting for a sign of life and suffering mightily over unrequited love. And in the meantime, a traitor in Washington has found out Dominika's true name and is going to try to sell it to the Russians for money. And that's basically the sort of the plot line over two books.
Is she going to read first?
We want to clear the room.
I should add that if you may remember that Putin disappeared for a couple of weeks this spring, and there was a lot of speculation. Had he died and the Russians hadn't told anybody? Had he gone to Switzerland to watch the birth of his love child? Had he had some kind of cancer treatment, or had he had cosmetic surgery? And I don't know, but we were worried that he might have died, and then we were going to have a little bit of a problem with this book. But thankfully, Putin is still alive and helping your publication, Jason.
I wake up every morning thanking Vlad for being Vladimir. Dominika also has a condition called synesthesia. It's a real-life condition. A synesthete, when they read letters or numbers, they see them as actual colors. It's got something to do with the wiring in someone's brain. I expanded her affliction to be able to read colored auras around the head and shoulders of people, and depending on the colors, it would indicate treachery or thoughtfulness or passion or evil or danger. So I'll start reading here. When she was 5, Dominica began seeing the colors. Words in books were tinted red and blue. The music from her mother's violin was accompanied by rolling airborne bars of maroon and purple. And her professor's father's bedtime stories in Russian, French, and English flew on wings of blue and gold. At age 6, she was secretly diagnosed as a synesthete by a psychologist colleague of her father's, who also observed the rare additional ability in Dominica to read people's emotions and moods by the colored auras that surround them. Her synesthesia made her one with music and dance, and she catapulted through the Moscow State Academy of Choreography, destined for the Bolshoi. A rival broke the small bones of her foot, finishing her ballet career in an afternoon. Vulnerable and drifting, she was recruited into the SVR by her scheming uncle, then deputy director of the service. He had pitched her to join up during the funeral wake for her beloved father. That was about the time when the other began, the bouistvo, the anger, the rage, the temper that would surge through her in reaction to deceit and betrayal at the hands of her service, and against the swollen bureaucrats who appropriated and encumbered her life. Dominica had long ago lost the patriotic idealism of her youth. The anger was overlaid by sadness and grief, as only a Russian could mourn, broadly and as dark as the steppes. And she saw how the successors to the sclerotic Soviet Politburo, the cashiered KGB hustlers, and the thirsty oligarchs, and the crime lords, and the poker-faced president with his trademark sidelong glance, spindled Russians' potential, sold the future, and squandered the magnificent patrimony of Tolstoy, Tchaikovsky, Pushkin, and Ulanova, the greatest ballerina ever, Dominica's childhood idol. It was all done behind multiple curtains, masquerading as a government, a sovereign state, all behind Kremlin curtains. Her parents had embodied Russian soul, her father a professor of literature, her mother a concert violinist. But they had been ground down between the Soviet mortar and Stalin's pestle, confiding only in each other. Out of young Dominica's earshot, walking gingerly through life, just as citizens now walk on Moscow streets, different but the same, wearily paying bribes and boiling their brown tap water, and outside Moscow, dreaming of milk and waiting for meat, and hoarding the dear little tin of caviar for Maslenitsa, the end of winter holiday, a celebration as old as Russia is old, which brings the springtime promise of sun and warmth and food and change, which never comes. It never comes.
That's nice, thank you. So questions?
For YouTube recording.
Yes, sir.
I'll project. One of the things, what's that?
We need it for YouTube.
Oh, okay, no problem. One of the things I'm struck by is there is a wicked sense of humor running beneath the surface of these books. I could hear it a little bit in some of how you were characterizing Putin's Russia, but I also notice there's a lot of smartassery in the cables from operatives back to headquarters. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how accurate that is to your experience and how much actual piss-taking operatives are able to do with their superiors while out in the field.
Thank you for your question. Next. Truth be told, the CIA is a very, how shall I say it, informal organization, not at all like the military. The most junior officer will call the most senior officer by his first name. There is a great tolerance for smartassedness. There is a great tolerance for sarcasm and irony and fun in some cables. A chief of station, a young officer and a station will write a cable draft, and a chief will put even more pepper into it and send it on to headquarters. Don't forget, they the antecedents of the CIA was the OSS, which were populated almost totally by Ivy Leaguers, and they were all very, very, smart ass. So much so that the Russians used to get the yearbooks of the major Ivy League schools and tear out all the pictures of the graduating class and put them in their files, confident in that a certain percentage would show up in the operational field. So there was a lot of smarminess in the agency. It has changed a lot since those days.
Has it lost its sense of humor since 9/11?
Significantly so, yes. And it's gotten politicized. And I'm not speaking against congressional oversight, but congressional oversight has really, really crushed the organization. And the irony also is that the global war on terror has significantly affected the classic mission of human intelligence. We're sending people to Yemen and Baghdad and Pakistan, and people don't know how to operate in Paris or Caracas or Tokyo. Yes, sir.
I suppose my question is more about writing as a former agent. Being a member of the intelligence community and then going on to be an author has a long history going back to Fleming and Le Carré. I was wondering what sorts of elements of this fictional storytelling you enjoy and what bits you find kind of annoying or false. I suppose on the dark side there's Le Carré's manner of trying to be bleak and depict things in the most dystopian terms possible, where everything is just grim and all difference erodes. Whereas, with Fleming, of course, we've got all the humor of James Bond. What sorts of things do you like about this history of spy storytelling, and what sorts of things are you trying to bring to your own stories?
Well, there are a lot of espionage thrillers written out there, but very few authors have actually lived the life. And the two you mentioned, and some others, Charles Cumming, Charles McCary, do that. And I think what I enjoy most is writing about the inside game of espionage. The extent that they'll let me describe it. But for me, the thrill is describing a surveillance detection route that lasts 14 hours in freezing cold. And it's basically opening the furnace door and letting people look at a secret world that the few know exist. Everything in my book had to be reviewed and approved by the agency's publication review board, the fearsome PRB. And I spent 33 years stealing other people's secrets and protecting our own, so I sort of know what's classified and what's not. In effect, I used this line a couple of times in the last couple of days. My two books are actually love letters to CIA, celebrating a career in an elite organization doing arcane work and serving my country. And so that's part of the answer to your question, is being able to write about what I did for 33 years. That's sort of a joyful project. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, I was going to add something similar, but you mentioned Charles McCary, and he's like awesome,
He's unbelievable.
I wanted to ask your opinion of him, and also, is he celebrated by the agency? Do your peers read him, know him, and celebrate him?
I think colleagues who read a lot and read a lot in the genre probably know him very well, but he's not a household name. He was a non-official cover officer in the 1950s, and he's still alive, and he's still writing. I was at a bookstore that basically handles Otto Penzler's bookstore, and he said he just finished another book. Oh my God, is right. I mean, he must be 85, 90.
I was there when Otto brought in the latest.
Uh-huh. Charles McCary is fantastic. You know, he.
Otto said he's been after him for decades trying to publish something. He finally got to do so.
Yeah. He's a fantastic author.
I'm just curious if you have any sources in Russia that can tell you about the reaction anybody there may have had to the book, if anybody's read it, however high up you can go.
Well, the book is not incredibly flattering to Russia or Putin, which is why I used Colin's address as my mailing address for all fan correspondence. No, I have no idea, no feedback about whether they're even aware of it.
I'm pretty sure that you could not actually legitimately publish these books in Russia and expect to live and prosper indefinitely. I mean, really, quite seriously about that. I don't think that you could get away with it without being punished in a big way.
And I don't intend to go as a tourist to Russia from now on. No book tours.
Hi. What do you think was your greatest sacrifice in all your 30 years working for the CIA? Ever since I was a little kid, I was very enamored with the world of espionage, just reading tons of books about everything from the DST, the Mossad, MI5, MI6. All this stuff was super fascinating for me to see a different side of history that, because you are the big changes in history, like, go behind closed doors, and you guys don't really get the credit. It's usually the people up front. But what do you think was your biggest sacrifice in your career?
Well, we worked long hours and worked hard. We raised two. My wife was also in the CIA, so we were a tandem couple, and we raised two gorgeous daughters, and they had a terrific childhood living overseas. But there are a lot of hours spent away and missed recitals, the usual thing with any kind of professional occupation. The rest of it was adventures overseas and doing good work. I suppose dealing with the bureaucracy in its different iterations over the decades caused some heartburn. But now, in retrospect, and looking back on the career, it's mostly positive. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Jason, you write so eloquently about the tradecraft and great successes in these moments in both books. And yet, over the last 30 years, the intelligence community has missed 2 or 3 of some of the biggest changes, whether it was the collapse of the Soviet Union or the 9/11 or weapons of mass destruction. Given the obvious strength of the intelligence operations around the world, how does something like that happen?
Well, it's a tremendous question, and it basically typifies the overarching conundrum of our lives, and maybe this is another part of the answer to your question. We cannot celebrate our successes, and they must always stay secret. And almost as a counter reaction, our failures are trumpeted. And missing the demise of the Soviet Union is a sort of a geopolitical estimate. I think there were half again as many analysts in CIA who predicted it. But for politics, just like the weapons of mass destruction issue in Iraq and other things, the FBI had lots of leads for the Boston bombing, and they neglected to pass it on. Human frailty comes up, politics comes up, careerism comes up. It's an imprecise art. Espionage is the second oldest profession, but it hasn't changed since the biblical times. That's sort of a evasive answer to your question, but human people miss events coming up. Yeah.
We have one last question.
Your editor mentioned it earlier, somewhat jokingly, that now is a particularly fortuitous time to be publishing a book about spycraft inside of Russia. I guess I was wondering, how long ago did you begin writing this series of novels focused on Russia, and what influenced your choice of Russia rather than some of the other places that you've been stationed overseas, especially in light of the fact that you've been talking about how tradecraft has been disappearing and people are not focusing necessarily on the human element of espionage, which is carried out throughout the places you've been stationed in, I imagine.
I started writing fiction the day after I retired. Writing books, novels, while one is active duty is difficult and tricky in the extreme. Although people do it, and I was determined to write a classic novel of the old/new Cold War, pitting the main enemy, Russia, against the United States. There's so many thrillers out there that involve, it's always a retired, troubled NSA employee or CIA employee or FBI employee for some reason who's being hunted by psychotic former colleagues, who's helped by a bipolar ex-wife or girlfriend, who's chasing a terrorist with childhood issues. It's got a briefcase nuke, 12 hours to go. I wanted to get back more into sort of the old Cold War, Berlin Wall kind of feel for it. Whether I accomplished it or not, I don't know.
Wonderful. That's all the time we have for the conversation portion of the evening. On behalf of the Strand, thank you so much, Jason and Colin, for joining us tonight. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you.